Senator Mike Lee. Senator, great to have you with us, sir.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be on the show with you this morning.
Okay, Senator, I want to get right to trade. The Trans-Pacific Fast Track Partnership Act coming up today. How do you stand on it and why?
I'm still waiting to see the bill. I haven't seen the bill yet. It's still working its way through the committee. As soon as it comes out, I will review it. In general, I'm in favor of free trade. But the devil's in the details, as with any piece of legislation. I want to review it before I decide how I'm going to vote on it.
That makes sense. Why has it been developed in such a shroud of secrecy?
Well, I don't know that I would describe it as necessarily being developed in a shroud of secrecy as much as it has been a work in progress. It's been going through the committee process. I'm not on the finance committee, and so I haven't been part of those discussions. But to my knowledge, the bill hasn't been released yet. And like I say, I've got this old-fashioned policy that I won't agree to vote for something until after I've had a chance to review it.
Yes, actually read it, unlike some other things that have gone through and nobody had a chance to read them, Senator. Let's get to the fact that you'll be in Harrisonburg this afternoon. What fired you up about coming to Southwest Virginia?
Well, Mark Obenshain is a strong conservative, and he's somebody who shares a lot of values in common with me. And when I was invited to go down there and speak at his event, I was honored and was pleased to agree to do it. I look forward to talking to my fellow conservatives today in Virginia and look forward to this event.
Well, Senator Lee, we're excited to have you also, and it's always good to have somebody of your stature defending liberty, be at Oysters for Obenshain. Give us your assessment right now of the Iranian situation. How do you see it playing out, sir?
Well, I think it's always a bad thing when somebody enters into a negotiation with the mindset that any deal is better than no deal at all. And while I don't speak for the president, his actions to me have suggested that he's undertaking that kind of posture. And look, whether you're negotiating over the price of a car or negotiating over the settlement of litigation or negotiating over the sale of a business, you don't want to go in with that kind of posture or it will weaken your position. I fear that that's what the president's been doing, and that's why I'm skeptical about any terms that he might be coming forward with, especially insofar as those terms don't require Iran to actually show compliance with an agreement prior to our lifting of any sanctions.
Senator Lee, do you think there's a chance that the deal that's been made, or it's not really a deal, right, the framework, if you will, that is not going to get through the Congress?
Well, yeah, I think there is a possibility of that. I think a lot of people are waiting to see what the deal looks like in the end before making an ultimate decision. But there are a lot of people who have concerns within Congress about this kind of a deal, and I'm one of those people who would put myself on that list. Look, we've got a situation with Iran in which they are talking about wiping Israel off the face of the earth. This is our most important ally in the Middle East, one of our most important allies worldwide. And the contempt that Iran has for Israel is contempt that Iran also has for the United States, and for very similar reasons. And so I think we've got to be very careful about entering into a deal with a government like this, especially when they don't swear off their sponsorship of terrorism, especially when they don't swear off their promise to wipe Israel off the face of the earth.
I mean, there's a lot of people from the outside saying, why does it make any sense to take the economic sanctions off them when it was the sanctions that brought them to the table? And you also know without the sanctions, billions of dollars will go into their economy, and then they'll take that money and continue to fund terrorism all over the Middle East. It's just tough to see how this makes any sense.
Well, that's right. And that's why, if anything, what we ought to be doing, if we're going to be entering into negotiations with them, I think we ought to be escalating the sanctions, not lifting them, as we go into talk with them. And yet the president has continued his opposition to escalating the sanctions under the Kirk Menendez proposal, and I think that's short-sighted.
Let's go to the Yemeni situation with the Houthis. What, if any, should our involvement be with them, with that situation?
I don't know. This is the product of a government that projects weakness abroad and overbearance at home, and I would like to see some leadership from the president on this. I'd like to see a plan from the president on what we're going to do to protect American national security. That always has to be our focus, protecting American national security. I haven't heard a plan from him, and I'd like to hear more action from him. The president is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces, and I'd like to see him proposing a way forward that will protect us.
Okay, Senator Lee, speaking of President Obama, he came out on Tuesday talking about the riots in Maryland, and basically he blamed it on the fact that Republicans have blocked his spending plan, and if we had the spending plan, they'd have jobs, better opportunity, and there wouldn't be riots. Evaluate that statement for us.
It's mind-boggling. It's stunning. I mean, I really don't know how someone gets away with making such an assertion. And I would like to believe that that's not what he meant, that that's somehow not what he said. But I think it's absolutely irresponsible to make an assertion like that, and it's completely inaccurate. But more than that, on its face, it is implausible to the point of being embarrassing. And I'd like to see him retract that statement.
Senator Lee, since the Republicans took over the Senate in November, then you got the majority in January, there's a lot of conservatives asking what's really changed, because there hasn't been a lot of action, and there hasn't been anything that Barack Obama's attempted to do, whether it be Loretta Lynch or anything else that's actually been stopped. When are we actually going to see a change?
Well, first of all, we are in the process of passing a budget, what will be the first budget to have passed in Congress since the invention of the iPad. I mean, it's been more than 6 years since Congress has passed a budget. Mm-hmm. Without a budget, there's no regular order appropriations process, and without that, it's a lot harder to hold the executive branch of government accountable. My hope and my expectation is that we will get that budget passed. That will set in motion a regular order appropriations process, meaning we'll start funding government in at least 12 spending bills that allows us to withhold funding from certain programs that we think are wrong or that need to be reformed, and prioritizing our spending. And I think that can make a big difference. As I explain in my new book, Our Lost Constitution, the spending power is one of the most important tools that we have in our government to protect us against an overreaching chief executive. And so, as I explain in my book, this power is essential toward restoring our liberty and protecting us from a president who acts in a manner that's unlawful and unconstitutional.
Where do you think we'll end up with his amnesty program, Senator?
Well, I think where we should have ended up is we should have withheld funding from that program, from the Department of Homeland Security, for the implementation of the program. It was unlawful. The president had no authority under the statutes or under the Constitution to effectively rewrite our immigration code, and yet that's what he did. It's one of the reasons why I voted against the Homeland Security spending bill a few months ago, was because I don't think it's okay for us to continue to fund those programs even after the president has unconstitutionally written the law in that area. I hope and will continue to encourage my colleagues to withhold funding when the president does these kinds of things. But the farther this train moves forward, the harder it is for us to rein in that program. And it really is very worrisome. We've got to remain vigilant on that. And I hope and expect that we'll take steps the next time it comes time to fund the Department of Homeland Security to restrict funding to that program.
We're with Senator Mike Lee. Senator, going forward, what is your number one objective now?
Well, my number one objective is to restore the prominence of the U.S. Constitution, to make sure that we follow the checks and balances put forward in the Constitution, to follow the checks against the excessive accumulation of power. As I explained in our lost Constitution, there are two types of protections that the American people have against the excessive accumulation of power. One is a vertical constraint, and the other is horizontal. The vertical constraint is one that guarantees that most powers will remain at the state and the local level. The horizontal constraint is one that says that Congress makes the laws, the president enforces them, and the courts interpret them where they're in dispute between two or more parties. We have allowed imbalances to occur within that framework, such that most of the power is now exercised at the national level, whereas it was supposed to be at the state and local level. And we now have most of our lawmaking occurring within the executive branch of government because Congress has punted or delegated that power to executive branch bureaucrats. So we've got to restore both balances. Congress has the power to do that. The American people need to start demanding it and voting accordingly.
So when you say people should demand it, I mean, give us an example.
Okay, so one of the things that I explain in my book is that people need to approach congressional elections for senators and congressmen, differently. They need to approach it from the standpoint of asking very specific questions to find out where each candidate stands with regard to the enumerated powers of Congress. They need to know how far the candidate would extend the government's power, for example, under the Commerce Clause, or how far they would interpret other powers granted to Congress, whether to what extent they'd be willing to deal with excesses of presidential authority through the spending process or otherwise. These kinds of questions will ultimately influence the way people vote, and they'll ultimately influence the way members of Congress vote once they're elected. But in order to restore the primacy of the Constitution, we've got to be aware of it, and that's why I wrote this book, to tell the stories behind the Constitution, explain why these provisions came into existence, why they still matter today, and how we can restore them.
If our listeners want to read your work or Lost Constitution, Senator, where do they go?
They can go to Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble or just about anywhere else where books are sold, but I know they've got it at Amazon and at Barnes & Noble. And if you can go online right now, you can either download it onto your Kindle or any other ebook reader, or you can order a hard copy. And if you want to go pick one up today, and if you're going to be there tonight, I'm happy to sign it for you.
Well, I am excited. I'm going to buy one this afternoon on my way over to Oysters with Obenshain. Senator Mike Lee with us. Final question, Senator. The Supreme Court ruling on gay marriage. What do you think will happen?
I was at the Supreme Court yesterday. I watched the 2.5 hours of argument. And, you know, based on what the Supreme Court has said in recent cases over the last few years, I've been predicting that the Supreme Court is more likely than not going to rule that there is some type of constitutional right to gay marriage. Now, I don't see anything in the Constitution that protects that. I disagree with what I expect will be the court's ruling. It does appear to be where the court is headed. Now, all that said, I was slightly less certain of that coming out of the courtroom yesterday than I had been going into the courtroom. There were concerns expressed by Justice Kennedy, who is widely expected to be the swing vote in this case, with regard to the appropriateness of the Supreme Court making this decision. He asked questions about, regardless of where one stands on the issue of gay marriage, is it really right for that decision to be made, not by the voters, not by the people themselves, but by 9 lawyers dressed in black robes in Washington, D.C.? His questions seemed to be heartfelt. His questions seem to be very sincere, and they seem to be rooted in a deep concern for our constitutional system. And so that gave me some hope that maybe he's still thinking about it, and maybe this isn't a done deal after all.
What about Roberts?
I sense that Chief Justice Roberts will likely vote with the conservatives. I could be wrong on that. I've been wrong in my predictions of him before, but he seemed much more aligned with where I expect the other conservatives on the court will go. So I suspect that Chief Justice Roberts, Justice Scalia, Justice Thomas, and Justice Alito, my former boss, will be on the side of saying this is a decision that the people ought to make for themselves at the state level. And I expect Justice Ginsburg, Justice Breyer, Justice Kagan, and Justice Sotomayor to go the other way, saying that the Constitution takes this question away from the people and makes it so they can't decide it for themselves at the state level. And so Justice Kennedy will, in my opinion, likely be the deciding vote. It probably all comes down to what he thinks.
Okay, final question. Hillary Clinton emails. Did she break the law, and will anything ever come out of it, sir?
From what I understand, there were requirements in place prohibiting her from using the type of email system that she had, a non-official email system. Not every person in the government is required to do that, but from what I've been told, the Secretary of State is required to do that. And so if my understanding is correct in that regard, then she may not have been complying with the law. As to whether something will become of it, I'm not sure. The president and his administration hold the keys necessary for most investigative purposes, and certainly for purposes relevant to any fines being levied or any charges being brought or anything like that. And I do think there will be a full inquiry in both houses of Congress over this, and we'll see what comes of that.
Okay, that's going to be the final word. We want to thank Senator Mike Lee, Republican from the great state of Utah.